Thank you everybody for turning up this evening. And I think we're in for a real treat tonight because we have Jenny Nell, who is going to tell us a lot about a fascinating historical figure, Carl Bellman. Jenny herself, I've never met, except of course this way, through the magic of Zoom. But I hope to meet her when I go to Stockholm before too long, and to begin to explore with her some of the historical settings for what she's going to tell us about the life and times of Carl Michael Bellman. Jenny herself is Senior Lecturer, Department of Culture and Aesthetics at Stockholm University. She's a PhD. She's been studying this particular subject and very many others, but this one for 25 years. And she's also president of the Gustav III Society. So we're in very, very safe and I think extremely knowledgeable hands tonight. And I want to thank Jenny particularly for agreeing to do this. Our link is tenuous because I know a whiskey guru who also happens to be a particular friend of Jenny's and is a Carl Bellman guru as well. Very rare to see those two things conjoining. Although, of course, as Jenny will tell us, Bellman was fond of the occasional tipple, though I doubt it was whiskey. Anyway, enough from me, and I'd like to invite Jenny to give us this lecture on the life and times of Carl Michael Bellman.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. It's a treat to talk about this subject. Obviously, I've been dealing with it for a long time. I will start by actually screen sharing. Let's see how that goes. Carl Michael Bellman, then, he is by far the most well-known Swedish 18th century poet, both in Sweden and internationally. Parts of his works have been translated into over 30 languages to date, most comprehensively so into German, English, Finnish, and Danish, but also into Russian, Italian, French, Chuvash, and right now, in a project ongoing right now, to Albanian. And he is known as the Swedish Shakespeare, not because of any resemblance in life or works or anything, but rather in his mastery of his language, his impressive use of rhyme and meter, as well as wordplay, his explorations of the human condition, both through hair-raising burlesque humor, through touching verses and scenic nature poetry. And he wrote about 2,000 individual pieces of text. And now let's see, who was he? What did he do? I'll try to draw a really quick picture. Now, Carl Michael Bellman's family originated from the Bremen area in present-day northern Germany. His grandfather married into another German family in Stockholm and became professor of Latin rhetoric at the University of Uppsala, also serving as dean and chancellor of the university. He was musically gifted and played the small cithern, kind of lute guitar hybrid, that was inherited by his grandson, Carl Michael, who played it as well. And you can see it in Stockholm's City Museum. Bellman's father was a secretary in the Royal Chancellery. He was well educated, married, and had many children. Carl Michael remembered 21 childbirths, which is probably an exaggeration, but 15 are registered. Carl Michael was the oldest of the lot, and the family had a few aristocratic acquaintances, but largely sort of hobnobbed with the members of the burgher class. And Carl Michael was born in the Dower House on Hornsgatan in Stockholm on February 4th, 1740. He had an attentive and expensive education. He started as a private pupil at a distinguished school in Stockholm and also had a private tutor. He received extensive training in languages. As far as we know, he spoke and wrote German, French, English, Italian, Latin, and probably Hebrew as well. He studied rhetoric, emblematics, psalm composition, music, and general theory of poetry. And under the mentorship of his tutor, Bellman produced rather advanced translation exercises, such as the Evangelical Thoughts on Mortality from the German of David von Schweidnitz, with the sonnets included, and the Moral Instruction by a Father for his son before a long journey, heavily abbreviated title there, from the French by Philippe Sylvestre Dufour. And both of these youthful works were published in 1757. In 1758, he was accepted for a position at the National Bank as an unpaid accountant. His banking experience lasted 4 years. And these years were also filled with much more than office work. Bellman was highly attracted to the nightlife in the capital city, with sort of a carnival atmosphere and masquerade balls. And here, Bellman's own talent as a poet, songwriter, and entertainer was discovered in his closest circle of acquaintances. But the lifestyle was expensive, to say the least. It became disastrously so when he fell into debt. In the spring of 1763, he was declared bankrupt, and it ended his short career at the bank, obviously. And according to one calculation, Bellman's personal debts in 1763 were equivalent to about 20 years of wages for a lower level functionary such as himself. The bankruptcy had dire consequences for the whole Bellman family. His father lost his position at the court, as well as the family house on Hornsgatan, which had to be sold. And the whole family fell into poverty, and both of his parents died of disease in 1765. Now, Anders Lysander, who was both a family friend and the head of the government office of manufacturing, arranged for a job for Bellman. This office was closed a couple of years later, but Bellman moved on to the General Customs Office. And his last official post in the government bureaucracy was his nomination as Secretary of the National Number Lottery in 1776. And this was an institution that had been created in 1773 by King Gustavus III. Bellman retained his position the rest of his life, and he could also now claim the title of Royal Court Secretary, which gave him access to the private salons of the highest classes. From 1771, he engaged a bit in the political structure in Stockholm with an appointment as a notary in the farmer's estate. Time passed, and Bellman was 37 years old before he could marry. In 1777, he married the 22-year-old Lovisa Grönlund, and Bellman's family plans could be linked to his recent appointment as Secretary of the Number Lottery, and his status obviously had also been raised by this title of Royal Court Secretary. But the family's economy remained weak. It has been reported that Bellman was quick to give away his money. Even as a family man, he could not see a hungry child on the street, and he was too quick to sign IOUs for his friends who rarely paid him back. So Carmichael and Lovisa Bellman had 4 children, and the marriage lasted 18 years until his death. She outlived the poet no less than 52 years. And admirers of Bellman visited her in her old age in the early 1800s and were duly impressed by her. She was not, however, very open about her own life, nor that of her husband. So we have very little information about their life together. Now, Bellman started as sort of an entertainer in the Stockholm private salons. The poetry he wrote as a young man during the 1760s consists of about 300 poems. These are mostly drinking songs, table songs, where Bellman took on different roles while performing them. An important suite of songs from this period presents figures from the Old Testament. We may find Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel and Abraham and Sarah and others. Now, this group of songs irritated the church fathers on account of their uninhibited portrayal of known figures from the Bible. But Bellman was simply carrying on an old tradition of songs and parodies that had been around for centuries in Europe, especially in Germany and France. Now, these songs most likely were wedding entertainments that Bellman performed, So we can imagine, for instance, that a bridegroom named Joseph could easily become the butt of a joke about his biblical namesake and so forth. And the patriarchs of the Old Testament are sort of brought down to earth in Bellman's poetry to a level that all could relate to. They were drinking and dancing and such. But the church reportedly responded very angrily, requesting that these sacrilegious pieces be collected and destroyed. So he was heavily censored in the beginning. Now, these biblical songs, I mentioned them because they are of importance for the development of Bellman's style, since they lead directly to the production of his most famous corpus, Friedmans Epistles, that I will get to shortly, which has links to the New Testament. And in performance, they were also mixed in with the songs of the next immediate step in Bellman's development, that of the brotherhood poetry. In the entertainments of the 18th century in Stockholm, orders like the Masonic Temple and other brotherhoods had a special place with important weekly or monthly gatherings. Many of the orders engaged in highly stylized ritual and ceremonies and singing and drinking ceremonies and such. So Bellman, with his newly discovered natural talents, was a member of several of these clubs and orders, and he was quick to create his own parodic fantasy order for alcoholics. Statutes were prepared that stipulated that no one was allowed into this order, called the Order of Bacchus, unless he had twice lain helplessly drunk in some gutter. In the chapters of the orders, as their meetings were called, Bellman's drastic comic talent had full play, as well as a new trait, the imitation of musical instruments and other sounds and noises. He was a reported master of that. The first time Bellman is named as a performer is in the diary of the poet Johann Gabriel Oxenstierna, who wrote on December 4th, 1769, and I quote, Bergklint and Schexel, two other famous poets of the day, came up to me and convinced me to follow them to Commissary Lysander to watch Bellman's comic act. I went along, and never in my life have I laughed so much at as this last evening. Bellman has established an order in honor of Bacchus, into which no one is allowed unless they have been seen by everybody lying in the gutter at least twice. Bellman holds his chapter meetings once in a while, dubs knights of the order according to their special merits, and last evening he held a special ceremony for a deceased knight of the order. Everything was in verse and set to melodies from the opera and theater. He sings and plays the sitar. End quote. So now all these chapter meetings center around certain important knights of the order. The names are taken from commonly known real visitors to the hundreds of Stockholm taverns of the time. The poetry connected with this fictional order grew in extent and complexity until about 1771, after which it was replaced by other genres for a time when Bellman began to be conscious of his career needs during the reign of the new king, Gustavus III, who had just succeeded his father, Adolphus Frederick. But as I said, the poetry of the Order of Bacchus did not entirely stop, and its book-length chapter meeting, The Temple of Bacchus Opened at the Death of a Hero, was published with extensive illustrations in 1783. It is a bewildering piece, to say the least. We have classical and Christian mythology mixed in with Swedish drunken figures in a sort of collected whole that is both, well, erudite and bizarre. I don't know how to describe it. It is one of the most peculiar works in all of Swedish literature. Some of the songs that are sprinkled throughout the poetic text are exquisite in their beauty and still very popular in Sweden, and we will listen to one of them in a moment. The action is set in an imaginary Bacchic temple in an Arcadian landscape on an idyllic island. Swedish features such as crows and pine trees are mixed with the parrots and almond trees of Arcadia. And the overarching idea is that of preparations for a ceremony in order of the deceased Movit, the Stockholm alcoholic. The guests are worshippers of Bacchus from all of Stockholm's pubs. And the high priestess, the priestess is the lady of ill repute, Ulla Vinblad, who is pregnant, possibly with Movit's child. And the action proceeds with sort of flashbacks and pronouncements over the dead hero and the ceremonies connected with his burial. And at the very end, Ulla gives birth to a new little Movit, and the sorrow and grief gives way to joyous toasting and salutes. And two of Sweden's outstanding artists of the time, the brothers Elias and Johan Fredrik Martin, incidentally living in England at the time, provided the illustrations. And it may have been Bellman's ambition to establish his reputation amongst the more accepted group of Swedish poets by means of the Temple of Bacchus. Bellman had always had difficulty freeing himself from the stigma of a sort of bacchanalian clown and entertainer that had followed him since he began writing and performing. And this is sort of a, well, Gesamtkunstwerk before the term was invented. And today the song pieces are the most celebrated, and I thought we'd have a listen to one of them. Now, this is performed in Swedish by a good friend of mine. It's online on the Bellman Society webpage, but you have the translation in English right next to it. I hope you can see it. Here we go.
Böljan sig mindre rör, Eol mindre viner, när han från stranden hör våra mandoliner. Månen han skiner, vattnet glittrar klart och kallt, syren, jasminer sprida vällukt överallt. Fjärin i guld och grönt glimmar på blomman skönt. Masken snart krälar ur sitt grus. Masken snart krälar ur sitt grus. Träden ett stilla sus och sin skykt förklarar, gömd i sitt gröna hus sommarfågeln svarar sin sång han parar med vår lilla mandolin mellan små skarar av en spread förströda bin. Fisken i lek och rom dansar på böljan om, och dagen snart klarnar klar och ljus. Dagen snart klarnar klar och ljus.
And there we have it. So Bellman also wrote religious poetry all of his life. These poems appeared alongside the Bacchanalian works, especially during the 1770s. He took part in the preparations for the official songbook of 1763 with a hymn, and his ambitions were that the king would order the church authorities to purchase the poet's religious thoughts in order to have them used in churches across the country. Now, this request was never granted, but he did receive permission to print his religious poetry, providing that he changed the title of the work from the proposed The Temple of Zion to something else, since the title seemed to lie too close to the newly published Temple of Bacchus. And obviously causing unwarranted associations in the public readership. Bellman allowed the correction of the title, and the work did appear, but it was received without enthusiasm, and the success that he had counted on never materialized. And he also tried his hand at playwriting, and some 20 works survive. Most of these works are occasional pieces, today noted more for their sort of sprightly songs than the actual plot. However, several of them were used as court entertainment, and Bellman was a highly appreciated actor in court divertimentos from the 1770s to 1790s. And this part of his production is yet to be researched properly in its correct context. But incidentally, myself and a colleague are actually working on a research project on Bellman's dramatic works right now. So we'll see what comes of that. Now, his most famous works, Friedmans Epistles and Friedmans Songs. Now, the idea for these collections of songs that have made Bellman famous both nationally and internationally occurred to him already in the 1760s. As I mentioned, Bellman had already written biblical parodies and parodies of the popular orders. But there is a significantly different and more original thought behind these new pieces of poetry. A new character is introduced. An actual alcoholic, a public drunk who at one time had been a highly regarded clockmaker to the royal family in Stockholm, Jean Friedman. Its text is closely related to the parodic songs concerning the Order of Bacchus with their sort of apostles of brandy. Here, the apostle attribute is confined to Friedman himself, and he sends epistles or letters to the faithful drunken congregations in various taverns in Stockholm. The parallel to the epistles of Paul to the new Christian congregation is, of course, entirely intentional. But when the Christian evangelists preach about eternity and our preparations for it, Friedman preaches about seizing the moment in which we live. The earliest of Friedman's epistles are rich in illustrations and huge, big, fat allusions to the Swedish Bible of King Charles XII. But gradually, these biblical references diminish. The epistles become much less like letters focused on drinking and lovemaking and more like little stories dealing with everyday strife and merriment, and the poetry becomes much more complex. The collection has a more or less fixed cast of characters that is rather large, but certain characters dominate the action, like Ulla Movits Mollberg. Experts on Bellman and on the history of Stockholm have identified most of the names in the poem as real people who lived there in the 18th century, but they are not sort of real as they appear in the songs. They are given new persona, and in their actions, they really take on fleshed out personalities that engage our sympathy and our laughter. Unlike the more ritualistic Order of Bacchus poetry, the epistles are clearly connected to the streets and taverns of Stockholm. The stories revolve around the everyday lives of notable drunks and prostitutes, their joys, their sorrows, some more serious, some pure comedy. And they were an immediate success. and Bellman's reputation as a genius was established. However, many also criticized these texts as being of low taste and vulgar, dealing with prostitutes and drunks. But they did become immensely popular right away, and there were many unauthorized versions, such like in broadside ballads or in handwritten songbooks that appeared all over the place. And Bellman had applied for permission to publish his Friedmans Epistles already back in the early 1770s, but it did not come to pass until 1780, mostly because of financial reasons. He finally received help by an acquaintance, the war counselor Erik Weste, along with a music publisher, Olof Åhlström, who set and printed the music. And a leading critic and poet of the day, Johan Henrik Källgren, was brought into the circle to provide sort of a critical overview of the text material. Everything that might be considered vulgar was corrected, and several of the epistles were eliminated entirely, and the collection was sort of given a more uniform appearance. So on the 16th of October, 1790, Friedmans Epistles was finally for sale in Stockholm. The editorial committee continued their work, and almost exactly a year later, the epistles were followed by a new collection called Friedmans Sånger. The new book is a much less cohesive piece and actually has very little to do with the Friedman figure altogether. One can find here drinking songs of a more general variety, some pieces from the Order of Bacchus, a number of the early biblical parodies, and several magnificent lyrical pieces. With these collections, Bellman revolutionized Swedish poetry. He pushed the boundaries of the dominating taste, the French classicist style that stipulated that high and low could never mix, that the life and loves of the lower classes were not considered fit for literature, that indigenous nature was banned in favor of Arcadian landscapes, and so on. Bellman actually equated the drunks and prostitutes with Roman gods and goddesses that sort of are sprinkled across Friedman's epistles. And by this, he foreshadowed later literary ideals. He brought not only the everyday person, but the lowly people, the alcoholics and prostitutes, the old discarded military and the barmaids into the world of great literature. And he did this almost 10 years before Oliver Goldsmith's The Deserted Village, and almost 25 years before Wordsworth's Lyrical Ballads, just for comparison. And he was considered a genius already by contemporaries, but one that sadly could not conform to the tastes of the time. Bellman produced very little prose. There are a few letters that have been preserved and some autobiographical notes, along with a comic magazine 8 issues that he produced with a friend of his called What's Your Pleasure, Vad Behagas. By way of contrast, there are more than 1,000 pieces of occasional poetry to the king and to members of the royal family, to Bellman's circle of friends, to patrons, and to family members. And for a long time neglected as works of only marginal interest, they are in fact a very rich source of information about the time in which Bellman lived, as well as further proof of Bellman's formal and lyrical gift as a musical poet. And a devoted follower of King Gustavus III throughout his reign, Bellman took the opportunity to, during the tumultuous days of the king's coup d'etat in August of 1772, of showing his support in a rousing anthem called A Skål for Gustav Skål, that caught on immediately and long remained a kind of national song or national anthem for Sweden. The king showed his appreciation by calling Bellman to the royal palace and designated him court secretary, providing him with an annual pension. And while Bellman actually never engaged in direct political debates, his loyalty to the king is clear, and his realistic songs were spread as quickly as his bacchanalian songs, taking up public questions concerning war and peace and things like that. In more traditional forms of poetry, Bellman showed himself to be a master of Alexandrines, Alexandrian verse. The classical French verse, from which its Swedish equivalent is derived, allowed no vulgar or low subjects to be presented. Proper high poetry was to record the deeds of kings and heroes or figures from classical literature or mythology. Bellman could use this technique, and in his poems of homage to the king, his Alexandrines are beautifully crafted without satire. The occasional poetry written for his circle of friends, including members of his family, are filled with the vicissitudes of life and difficult circumstances and joys and pains of everyday life. And the poems and songs at the death of one of his sons, Elis, is especially touching, and we will listen to that in a moment. Now, these poems provide an enormous wealth of background information on this considerable part of the poet's work. In the occasional poetry, one can find very rich proof of Bellman's range and mastery as a poet, as well as, I suppose, a kind of diary of his activities during 30 years of active production. But let's listen to his lullaby or cradle song. It is known by several names that he wrote when his son Elis passed away, only a few months old. And he sings this to his little boy, Charles or Carl. And this is in English. It's only a couple of verses. It's fairly long, so.
Sleep, sweet tiny Carl, in peace. 'Twill soon be time to wake thee. Time to taste our time's disease, whose bile shall ne'er forsake thee. What's our world? An isle of woe, breathing, born to death we go. Too soon the grey will take thee. In a field a stream ran by, straying from his fellows. Once a little lad did spy his face among the billows. Brief his image fair is seen in the pretty wavelets green, then only weeds and willows. Such is life upon our earth, the swift years disappear. Scarce we born to joy and mirth, then laid upon a bier. Tiny Carl shall so reflect, seeing pretty flowers have decked the springtime of the year.
And this melody is a old Swedish or Nordic folk song that Bellman put his own spin on, that later Beethoven actually used in his collection of world folk songs. So to say something, to try to explain Bellman's poetics, it's a hard task, but I will say a few words and we will listen to a couple of examples of this as well. Because undoubtedly Bellman was a master in all metrical forms current in his time and place. And he is famous for his remarkable song verses. Their appearance on the page is in itself striking, with long complex verse structures. Epistle number 50, for instance, has 37 lines, and the rhymes and metrics are repeated exactly in each succeeding verse. And these verses are also built up on complex melodies, and I will mention the music shortly, which have been analyzed by the poet, who follows every repetition and nuance in the tune with the verbal equivalent. And a sequence of 5 or 6 words on a single rhyme is not uncommon in his poetry. And the action of the poem, which is often lively is related in almost like breathless, short, parallel phrases of words, often reflecting a drastically humorous situation. Now, the early epistles are filled with cries and imperatives to the tavern guest, like look, listen, feel, notice, sing, drink. And these imperatives give the reader or listener a feeling of being present in an action that is taking place. And yet, like the whole concept of Friedmans Epistles is intentionally set in the past, since it is Bellman himself, as actor, entertainer, who plays the role of a deceased Bacchanalian apostle, presenting a bit of fictional history as if it were unfolding before our eyes. The boundaries between reality and fantasy, the here and now versus the dead and gone, are effectively blurred and confused. Now, add to this his proficiency in imitating voices and noises and musical sounds, and we can only imagine what kind of, entertainment he could offer. Now, there have been many attempts at recreating this, but usually with several different voices, and we'll listen to one of these examples with like very swift wording. And let's see if I can get this video to play. It is duly ripped off of YouTube, so please don't spread it around. However, I know the person who made this CD. It was actually Hasse, who was mentioned at the beginning. So I sort of have kind of tacit permission to do this. And here it is. It is quite lengthy. It's about 5 or 6 minutes, so bear with me.
Was ist das? Make way there on the water steps, fiddlers, shoeshiners, custom snoopers, and sailormen. Hurrah! Put the herring tail on the tankard.
I thought the matches 6 bunches a farthing.
Shut your gob, you old witch. Out of the way, coal-heavers, washwomen, milkmaids. Your very good health, sir. Make way for Borvitz and his bass viol. Stand aside, herring packers, bakers' boys, peddlers, tailors, and bird catchers. Oh, and you, Miss Overseer, or Underseer, or what the hell other kind of a dockside seer you may be. Can't you give that blind old man a hand up with his hurdy-gurdy? Stop shoving. Smack his face for him. Make way for this gold-braided old gent in epaulets with his bears that dance a polska. Struth, Morvitz, but you are a sight. I recognize that wig. He's borrowed it from the shoemaker opposite the Vismar Tavern in Coalheaver Alley. Ha ha! How funny he looks with his bass viol on his back, a tulip in his hat, the valve horn under his arm, and a bottle in his pocket. Step down into the boat, sir. What's that gilded applecrot with a monkey on his shoulder trying to say? Le diable! Il porte son violon, oui, par-dessus l'épaule, comme le Suisse porte l'alibarbe. Now he puts his valve horn to his lips.
Ach, du Tummerteufel, versteht sich auf die Musik wie ein Kuh auf den Mittag. Movis, Bruder, willst du was Kirschen haben?
Step into the boat, Susanna. Mind the meat basket. Jump, little sister dear, you with your kid gloves and fish basket. Where's she been? Out mangling. Out mangling. Hurrah! A blast on the valve horn. Susanna sings. The breezes frolic, and the waves heave and sway. Shove off!
Splendid isle, I a while will flee from thy stir and noise. All thy proud palaces, blow your horn, move its yes. See our boat bravely float mid schooners and yachts. The Spanish trader note puts to sea gallantly. In Cadiz and Dublin soon she'll be. Score a shot. Was it not royal roofs against the sky, so tender melt the eye? In the valley below stands the arsenal, oh. On the wall, within call, embrasures and flags, big guns and cannonballs. See the flash, hear the crash. Encircled by cliffs, the echoes clash.
The waves gleam and glitter, the cooling gusts delight us. Is it all too much for you, Moritz? Your very good health, sir. But look across to the opposite shore. At the water's edge, what a forest of swaying masts and fluttering pennants. The sun beats down, church bells peal, drums thunder, ensigns flutter, pikes gleam, and the chimes tinkle and trill. Uncork the bottle! Ha ha ha! Morvitz flings away his hat and wig among the waves and drinks the whole world's skull. Skull! A blast on the Balthorn! Easy on the oars! Quiet now. The nymph sings, and the zephyrs echo her voice.
Tra-la-la,
She
tra-la-la-la,
smiles at me, her hat in her hand, enlaced with rosy band. At her breast, a bouquet, frilly skirts, well arrayed.
tra-la-la-la-la-la-la-la.
Oh, la come, known to some, so deftly she skips ashore with buxom bum.
Oh, go to, thanks to you, I've torn sir my apron quite in two.
Raillery,
Let me be to slaughterhouse steps, no further will I go.
as it is, here you sit.
And my heart it could split.
Nearly there,
Don't you dare sit still, I entreat. Don't touch my rose so rare.
oh, but why?
Sooner I, unmade among these waves, so would die.
Yeah, and there we have it. All these different languages you hear were languages that Bellman heard. The docks were filled with people from all around the world during this time, and so he drew from that. And obviously, he had the language skills to put on proper accents and all of that. But okay, how about that? How about that? No. Yay! Okay, sorry. To mention something also about the actual music, it is so hard. My time is running out and everything, but as a songwriter and entertainer in Stockholm's bourgeois circles in the 1760s, Bellman began his poetic career using the art of parody song. That means that old tunes were reworked with new verses and spread even by people who could not read a note of music by means of a reference to be sung as. Now, this was the most common form of entertainment of the day, and the public appetite for new songs, table songs, political songs, love songs, drinking songs, you name it, was enormous, and the songbooks of the time really reflects this sort of constant search for new material. And certainly sort of hit tunes from popular French operettas and German student songs and English ballad opera tunes circulated with new Swedish texts, and instrumental dance tunes such as minuets, or contradances, or polonaises were also made into songs. And Bellman's special talent for sort of setting text to melody and his hair-raising humor, along with his inimitable talent at imitating voices and musical instruments and other noises, made his performances into sort of the special events like the one described by Oxenstierna in his diary. And his voice was noted as being flexible, although not loud or strong. So we also know he was not capable of writing down his melodies for publication, as evidenced by the repeated remarks that he had professional help with this. But during his activity as an entertainer, however, it is clear that the many of the melodies that he had picked up from various sources became sort of his. That is to say, there were alterations in the melodies that made them significantly different from their sources. They had, for all practical purposes, become sort of Bellman melodies, and they are referred to in this way today. The alterations could be as small as a single note, or as large as an addition or subtraction of several measures, a change from major to minor key, or a host of other alterations. So he clearly had a huge musical talent. And the melodies you find in Friedmans' epistles and songs are then sort of Bellman's personal variants of popular tunes from the middle of the 18th century. And they all belong to the Bellman song tradition. And in fact, in cases where the tunes are recognizable, they can be shown in most instances actually to have superseded their predecessors in terms of popularity and worth. And there are some melodies that have not been identified as belonging to any previously known melody, and it is highly possible that he has composed those himself. And I thought we'd listen to one of them. Did somebody mention that Martin Best is in the audience? This is from his record. This is from YouTube, but I have all his records, so I'm just going to say for the record. And let's see. Yes, you appear.
This is wonderful. I'm here.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm a huge fan, and I have all the records. But wow. Ripping off of YouTube was easier for this. I'm sure they will mute it.
Well,
let's see.
Okay.
So I hope you allow.
I most certainly do. I'm very honored. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a beautiful tune, and it's beautifully interpreted, obviously, by Martin Best, and with the translation of Paul Britton Austin. Here we go. One of his own melodies, probably.
His hammer Vulcan drops, forgetting wars alarms. But now I go to sleep.
Yeah, there it is. Thank you so much. And I have to say, while you're in the audience, I'm so sorry to just kind of trips in like this, but this is actually the recording that put me on to Bellman research in the first place. So thank you so much, Martin. It's been a wonderful 25 years, and I hope for 25 more. Okay, so I'll try to wrap this up now.
I was just going to say, you're very, very kind. It was very emotional listening to that. Couple of things. I think it was more than 25 years. But anyway.
Well, not for me.
Oh, I see.
I'm
well,
old,
anyway,
but I ain't that old, but thank you. But
well, I am old. I am old. And,
but yes.
I will say that that recording was made at Nimbus Records, which was my record company for many years. And they used this technique of an ambisonic microphone. And that meant that we recorded in a rather resonant room with just this one ambisonic microphone, and it doesn't pick up the words very clearly. And some people even think that that record is actually in Swedish, but never mind. And in addition, it's been quite a controversial record. Some people have absolutely loved it, and it's been very well reviewed. And other people have said, I read one comment just the other day which said, it is borderline opera, too bad.
Aww.
So yeah,
well,
I'm glad. No, I'm glad it stirred up some opinions anyway. Thank you for playing it.
Well, thank you.
It's very moving to hear it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's from 77 or 78 or something like that.
No, 80, it's 81.
Is it 81? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, at least I was born. So, but as I said, I've been dealing with Bellman 25 years, and this is sort of what got me on that trail. Yeah.
Well, that's wonderful. Wonderful to know. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I'm honored to have you in the audience, and you know plenty more than I do, I feel. So we'll see. I'll try to wrap this up anyway, and sort of go into, if I can do this, maybe I can, maybe I can't. What's going on? This also shows my age in a bad way, not handling the technology properly. Okay, here we go. So the publication then of Friedmans Epistles in 1790 was a moment of literary triumph for Bellman. But the 4 years that followed brought, by contrast, only a degrading catastrophe. The murder of King Gustavus III in 1792 was a terrible blow for the poet. He had supported the king for more than 2 decades with his songs and homages, and in return he had received both encouragement and financial rewards. And there was no comparable advantage in the aftermath of the Gustavian age. The low point occurred in the spring of 1794, when Bellman was arrested for his debts and incarcerated in the Stockholm castle for 10 weeks. Only his title of court secretary saved him from debtor's jail. And that room is actually preserved and can be viewed with special arrangements in Stockholm Castle. It is procured by a society called Bellmans Bellman's Memory, that are active to this day. The Bellman's debt in this case was actually quite inconsequential, but he was unable to pay it, and he and his wife were put under economic guardianship while the matters were being cleared up. And it has been said that his incarceration broke his health. The truth may be that his condition had been failing for some time. The one bright spot during the spring of 1794 was that his family doctor, Anders Blad, requested at a small sum per page that he write his autobiography. And the result was rather small, a 7-page document. And some of the facts are unreliable, but the information contained is extremely valuable. And there are sort of glimpses of the young, clever poet that appear here and there. And he lay ill on and off in 1794 and also from the beginning of 1795, probably with consumption. And he died a week after his birthday on February 11th, 1795. He was buried in the churchyard of Florida Church. This is a picture because there was no headstone to mark the grave. Today it's possible to visit the churchyard and to see this that you see in front of you now, the Bellman monument with its fine medallion portrait conceived by his friend, the sculptor Tobias Sergel. And this monument was erected by the Swedish Academy as late as 1851. And it does not mark the actual spot where Bellman was buried. His remains were dumped in a mass grave at the time. It is only known that Bellman lies somewhere within the boundaries of this small churchyard. And after Bellman's death, then his poetry and genius, such as his artistic brilliance, his social commentary, his role both as a conveyor of old musical poetic tradition and as the renewer of this tradition, was celebrated in a different way and is still carried on today. I think I will actually just say thank you here. I've been talking for long enough and there might be some questions or something going around. So I'll just stop. This is actually a reconstruction of his death mask that was made in 2017. It was contained in the old, we have sort of an old wax cabinet in Stockholm, and that was demolished. And this mask was saved and sort of reconstructed. So this is the last glimpse we have of him. And I'll stop the screen sharing now and let whoever is hosting say what we're to do next.
Well done. That was lovely. That was amazing.
I'm here for questions and
thank you.
Clarifications.
Thank you very, very much. I'm sure, as Alexander was saying, that's been a fantastic talk, and I've learned a great deal more about him than I knew before. So thank you, Jenny. And those musical illustrations, obviously, with our local contributor, as it were, Martin Best as well, were fantastic. Actually, they were beautiful, beautiful pieces of music and very nicely performed. So that really helped to sort of anchor what you were talking about in terms of his genius. Can I just sort of let me start while people are thinking of questions. There are quite a few questions I've got. The first of them might be, did he make a lot of enemies, do you think? Because he was somebody who could satirize and perhaps poke fun at people. And I wonder, as an allied question to that, I'm not sure that he was heavily recognized, shall we say, after his death. It took them a while, didn't it, to give him a sort of more auspicious statuary and medals and things. What do you think that sort of delay was due to? Were they unsure of what to make of him, or were there too many enemies still living? What do you think, Jenny?
I think his contemporaries had a hard time to know what to make of him because, you know, he did his own thing. He was a master of many arts, but he chose. I mean, he was told several times to stop involving the taverns and stop writing about prostitutes and drunkards, you know, and he just continued, even though he knew it was sort of the wrong thing to do, and you know, the sort of censorship, the royal censorship was, you know, there, and you know, just said don't do it anymore, and he just went like, yeah, well, you know, I think I am. So he just continued. So he had an aesthetic and you know, leaps and bounds before others. And he stuck to his guns, so to speak. He didn't conform. He could have conformed. I'm sure of that, because my dissertation is about his realistic poetry, and he conforms, I would say, better than any other of the time, but he chooses not to. But some hailed him as a genius already in his own time. And then obviously the romantics, shall we say, it started like the romantic age in Sweden starts about 1812, 1815, around there. And they sort of hailed him as this sort of new Orpheus, like this genius. And it was taken from there, really. Somebody who was, saw well ahead of time, or, so it has varied, really, what to say of him. The people who misunderstand him think he's a drunk who just writes about other drunks and stuff like that, but they couldn't be more wrong, and they were proved wrong as well.
Great, thank you. Other people have got questions.
So let's
Alexander, I
see.
don't know whether you can see. Yep, you can.
Who wants to kick off?
Someone has their hand up.
Yes, Ridian.
Yeah, I have my hand up. That was absolutely super, Jenny. I loved it. I didn't quite understand why he should be regarded as the Shakespeare of Sweden. Is he not more the Robert Burns, if you look at his subject matter, the lifestyle, the affection for women and drink, which are two splendid things, I'm bound to say myself. But what do you say to that?
Well, it's not my phrase for sure, but I think actually it was Paul Britton Austin who got that started. It's based largely on one of the epistles, Ack du min moder, my poor mother, where sort of a drunk is ruminating in the gutter about his life and his conception and the whole human condition, and the vicissitudes of life, and all of that. And as I said in the beginning, it's not really like a comparison as such, more than sort of the virtuoso sort of use of language, and the way he plays with words, the way Shakespeare does in his language. It's sort of that comparison that has been made, more or less. Subject matter, of course, yeah, you can say Goldoni in Italy, you can say the French drinking songs of the 1600s, 1700s, and of course Robert Burns. So, but it also it's a sign of the times a little bit as well. He is a child of his own time as well. So
thank you.
I can see Martin Best's hand up again.
Well, is it up again? Well, anyway, no, I think that Bellman is a far greater poet than Robert Burns ever could be, to be honest with you. I can understand how you draw that parallel, but the thing about Bellman is that he doesn't have any parallel. He's completely unique, and I think having performed him for many, many years, every time I did perform him, I felt his spirit come through both words and music so strongly. The energy and precision and vitality of his writing is absolutely almost intoxicating, and he sits on a knife edge between chaos and order, and he navigates that place with extraordinary virtuosity. I don't know if there's time, but is this a place maybe for a little anecdote?
Yes.
Well, thank you, Jeremy. Well, this may amuse you. One day at home in England, the telephone rang, and on the other end was Kerstin Dellert, the great Swedish opera singer.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, the king has asked for you to come to Haga to sing on his birthday, at his birthday lunch. And so I went over to Sweden, and I was dressed up in the Bellman costume, and I went in with my citern, and there was the king and the queen sitting around the table, and and I sang a couple of songs, and it was that picture that you showed of Bellman singing to the king was exactly like my experience on that day. And what was fascinating was that in Haga, there is a staircase up to the upper story in the Haga castle. And the staircase is very, very narrow because only one person can get up it with a sword. And Gustav III made this staircase specially so that anyone who wanted to murder him had to come up in single file. And they could easily be killed back as they came up to the top of the stairs. And when I got up to this room where I was supposed to change from my ordinary clothes into the Bellman costume, I was up there getting back into my ordinary clothes, and in rushed two little princesses, and that was a really wonderful Bellman moment. So I just thought I'd share that little story.
Oh, that's lovely.
So thank you for this marvelous lecture. I did really I have learned a lot, actually.
I don't think so. It was very brief, you know.
Here.
There's so much more, and if you want, I can put up on the screen again if anybody wants to read more. I can just see if I can get this going. I put some further reading in English up for you. There's so much available online now as well, thanks to Litteraturbanken, Literature Bank of Sweden, where they sort of digitize almost every single piece of literature that we have. Also, Paul Britton Austin's translations, for instance, you can find there. You can either get the book at ABE Books in Britain online, or you can go and just scrounge off of Litteraturbanken there. And you might want to copy that link unless you want to do a search in Swedish, but I'll leave it up there. So you can take a picture and go in and check it out. And Britton Austin also wrote the definitive biography in English that exists to this day. And it's really, really good. If you want to get sort of a good atmosphere and good feeling of Stockholm in the 18th century, there's a place to go for sure. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So,
any more hands up here? I think we're all a little in awe. I'm thinking also Martin's take on Bellman is fascinating, because a lot of us also are familiar with Sven-Bertil Taube, who has been one who we've had a lot to do with as the Anglo-Swedish Society, and another one, and the other on the sort of muckier end of Bellman. I'd say that Martin brings the purity and the clarity. And then there's Cornelis Vreeswijk, who brings the more rough end of it, I think. He was a summer colleague of my father in a bank, and they almost shared a flat together, but they didn't get around to it. What have you to say about that, Martin?
Well, I worked with Sven-Bertil, and so did Jeremy Barlow, who's on this call. We worked for a long time with Sven-Bertil Taube in the mid-70s. We did 2 very successful seasons at Bounce. I think that his recording of Stolta Stad is extremely good. I think probably better than the one we heard, actually. Sven-Bertil made a couple of recordings with Ulf Björlin of Bellman, and they were huge bestsellers. He wasn't altogether pleased when I was working with him when I came out with this Bellman recording in English. I think he got a bit leery about that, but that's just artistic tension. So Cornelis Vreeswijk, yes, absolutely. I thought his recordings and his interpretations were fascinating, as indeed were Fred Åkerström's, which are available. I knew Fred Åkerström quite well, and he, like Friedman, was a big drinker, and he died a rather early death, unfortunately. But Fred Åkerström really brought out, like he was more of an actor than a singer in a way, but he brought out the whole drama of Friedman's existence and the squalidness of that life. Yes. So those two, Orkeström and Vrieswink and Sven Bertel, those three, I should say, were all marvelous interpreters of Bellman. And I mean, I think what I've heard today of Anders Fröling, I thought that was just perfect.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. I've not heard of it before, so I'm very glad.
There are more songs of his on the Bellman Society webpage if you want to surf it. We have one called Bellman Songs and one called Bellman International, where we have a few French and Italian and Danish and German interpretations as well. So you can just go in there and take a look. And we will change the website shortly, so it will be even more interactive. And all the melodies we have actually ordered a sort of a transcript of all the melodies that are recorded now, so you can do sing-alongs and stuff like that. So that's
wonderful, lovely.
Soon called the Bellman Songbook, so you can sing both in Swedish and in English. So you'll have the melodies up there if you don't have a or a sittern or anything. It'll be up shortly during this year.
This is wonderful, and it's been the most marvelous evening. I really have. I'm living in Spain now, and I'm in Andalusia, and to be sitting here thinking about and listening to Bellman and hearing you talk about him has been an absolute delight. So thank you so much for fixing this up and for inviting us all.
Well, thank you. I mean, he is the most amazing person to speak about because of his. You don't know where to go. He is at once very deeply rooted in his own time and completely universal at the same time, and as much the sort of methodic craftsman as the servant of impulse, and he is as much a traditionalist as a rebel. I mean, his poetic universe is like a kaleidoscope of ever-changing patterns and colors, and his verses are just like jewels in darkness and light. Sometimes they're mad and opaque, and sometimes they're like clear and sparkling, but always with an unspeakable amount of prisms. And I think that's why he's considered great, and that's why he's never stopped intriguing and inspiring new generations. So, yeah.
What is his status now in Sweden, Bellman?
It's fairly solid, I would say. There are new actors actually coming out. He was sort of the actor's poet for a long time. Bellman's actor friends were the ones starting to really perform his songs after his death, and now that has been taken up again by an actor friend of mine called Rickard Forsgren, who I think is on YouTube a little bit, and we have some recordings of his, and he's doing an album at the moment, as far as I know. So it's more, bodily interpretations and physical interpretations. And then obviously we have Martin Bagge, who is by far the greatest interpreter that we have at the moment, I would say. So yeah.
Thank you.
It's the tradition is alive and well, I would say. And I just found the other day, I find like a heavy metal interpretation, and then three little girls singing Bortalto Orujör, like a drinking song from the Temple of Bacchus, and had recorded it and put it on YouTube. You can find anything. So I think the tradition is alive and well.
This is great news. Thank you.
Yeah. Just go to YouTube. Everything is there. The whole world is there, apparently.
Sure.
And we're there.
Am I right in thinking the Bellmanssällskapet is 103 years? It's 1919 founded.
Yeah. So we celebrated 100 years as a society.
That links our societies, because we were formed in the same year, 1919.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah. So that's a good segue for what Alexander might be about to say in terms of one of the things we'll do to thank you for your kindness in honoring us with the lecture this evening.
Yes, in order to, as a thank you, and also a way of staying in touch with you, if you would accept complimentary membership of the society for this year and for 2023 as well. We'd be
Well,
very.
thank you so much. I'll stay a lifelong member, I promise.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
It's been a wonderful thing. David always comes up with organizes and gives also amazing talks, and really is the father of the online talks that really saw us through the pandemic. It kept us all together, kept us going. But actually, it's too good a format to give up, and it brings us our friends from further afield, Andalusia, Göteborg, Wandsworth, and it's a wonderful way of staying in touch. Although of course we look forward to seeing some of our members on Thursday, at the College of Arms, organised by our secretary Lucy, who has a close association there. The tickets for the 2022 Punch Bowl at the Cavalry and Guards Club have been released today. White tie ball, book early to avoid disappointment, and so we carry on and we enjoy each other's company, and we enjoy learning from wonderful speakers like you, Jenny. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me.
Big round of applause for you.
Thank you.
All the best. I'll look forward to seeing you, Jenny, sometime. I'll let you know when I'm coming.
Yes,
Okay.
give me a shout out and I will take you on a huge tour or several.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you
For
so
sure.
much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. And good
Thank you
evening,
to
everyone.
everyone who came. Thank you so
Yes,
much.
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Well done. Well
Goodbye.
done.
Good
Bye-bye.
night.